Good afternoon, third grade. I'm getting ready to read a chapter from Soldier Dogs, but before I do that, some people have been sending in their work, and we had a little bit of a problem on Journey's Workbook, page 97. So if you haven't done that page on adverbs yet, be sure that you're listening, and if you have done it and you're like, oh, I'm not sure if I did it correctly, please go back and correct. So this is what the page looks like. And it says, write the correct form of the adverb that compares more than two actions. If it's three or more, we are going to use est or most. So for easily, would we say easiliest or most easily? Number 2, furiously. Would we say furiousliest or most furiously? Number 3, late. Would we say latest or most late? Excuse me. Number 4, perfectly. Perfectliest or most perfectly? Number 5, rigid or rigidly. Rigidliest or most rigidly? And number 6, high. Would we say highest or most high? When we get down to number 1, we're doing the same thing. Sam worked slowliest or most slowly of all the workers. Jim shoveled the quickliest or most quickly of all the adults. Number 3, Sally worked the hardest or the most hard of all the people on her team. And the last one, Jenny always arrived earliest at work or most early at work. Okay, so that should help out a lot, and I'm going to go ahead now and read chapter 14 from Soldier Dogs. And they're running to a shelter. They found this man with a broken leg, and they've told one of the nurses, and she's going to go look for them, that the bombs are starting again. They haven't found Chief, but they are running for a shelter somewhere. A school, I guess, and Rachel knows the way. Matt and Rachel rounded the corner at a run. The sky was gone. The moon and stars were gone. Nothing was visible overhead but the smoke that covered Canterbury, swallowing up even the cathedral steeple. And the growl of the bombers sounded louder and louder. More planes, Rachel said. Maybe that's just the roar of the fire, Matt said. Or maybe it's fire trucks. No, Rachel grabbed his hand. It's more planes. Which way to the school? He asked. Here, she said, pulling him along the sidewalk. I hope they've got a basement, or we're in... The boom of a high explosive bomb shattered the night. Rubble spewed into the street from the end of the block. Windows shattered, walls burst. Twists of blackened metal pinged against cobblestones, and bits of charred cloth drifted in the air. Rachel stumbled, shouting in fear. Matt pulled her to her feet. His skin prickled with fear. His throat closed. The whistle of a falling bomb screeched in his ears. He couldn't move. He couldn't think. All he could do was stand there holding Rachel's hand while she shivered and... No, his sister needed him. He needed to be strong for her, like Eric would have been strong for him. He dragged Rachel backward. Glowing embers billowed around him, sparks prickling his skin like mosquito bites. A chunk of splintery wood slammed into the ground 10 feet away and scraped across the cobblestones. Without warning, another explosion sounded right behind them. Matt flinched and ran faster. Faster! Dirt flew over his head and stung the back of his neck. He ran until he couldn't tell if the noise was bombs or rescue workers or the pounding of his own heart. Finally, he turned to Rachel. "Are you okay?" Her cheeks were pale and her eyes were big. She said something in Polish or Yiddish, her voice faint. But still she squeezed his hand and tried to smile. And he tried to smile back. Neither of them did a great job, but he still felt some of his fear fade. He scrambled onward, turned a corner, and a red-faced man with wild eyes spun to face them. "Turn yourselves around," the man shouted in a thick English accent. "Get back away from Butchery Lane." Matt stumbled backward. He didn't understand. "It's a fire break. It's burning the whole thing." A fire break. Matt remembered Eric telling him about those. A fire break was a cleared strip of land with no bushes or trees or anything that could catch fire. It was wide enough that a fire could not cross it. But Butchery Lane was a street in downtown Canterbury. What did the man mean it was a fire break? Were they letting the whole street burn to the ground so the fire couldn't spread into the rest of the city? Matt didn't know, and he didn't ask. He just blindly led Rachel through the smoke-filled streets. She kept repeating a sing-song phrase under her voice, and then Matt realized she was praying. Bombs fell around them. Thick smoke changed the city into a nightmare. Matt heard the clatter of a bomb and saw a blaze of intense fire. His mind raced with fear. Now the Germans were dropping both incendiary, fire-causing bombs and 500-pound high explosive bombs. The incendiaries burst into super hot flames, but the HE bombs blasted entire buildings into rubble. As Matt stumbled away from the flames, a bone-shaking explosion almost knocked him to the ground. He grabbed Rachel's hand and dashed into a side street. Smoke stung his eyes, and the dark city streets spread in front of him, strange and threatening. Finally, he and Rachel stumbled into a sprawling, shadowy city park with a big mound. After a moment, Matt recognized the area. "Oh, this is the park." Rachel wrinkled her nose. "Which park?" "Where I tried to teach you baseball." "Oh, the baseball is silly," Rachel said. She hadn't hit a single ball, and she could barely hold the bat right. Matt's fear faded a little at the familiar surroundings. He turned round in a circle, getting his bearings, trying to figure out where he was. According to Eric, this had been a Roman cemetery almost 2,000 years earlier. The old city walls ran along one side of the park. The bandstand had been torn down for scrap metal to help with the war, and some kind of military warehouse was dug into the wall nearby. Not a shelter, though. They still needed the school for that. Now that he'd stopped running, Matt realized that he'd been hearing a rhythmic pounding for a while. "I guess that's anti-aircraft fire," he told Rachel, "like the ATS woman said." "Oh, no," Rachel said. "More fire?" No, it's a good thing. It's the British shooting back at the bombers." "The Brits," Rachel repeated, because she thought it was funny that the British were called Brits and the Americans were called Yanks. "That's right," he said, looking at the smoke-filled sky. "Do you hear that?" "I hear a lot of that's," she said. That new engine sound. I bet it's a Royal Air Force night fighter finally come to blast a few holes in the Germans. British fighter planes? Yeah, Matt glanced down at Rachel. They'll teach those old Fritz a lesson. Rachel squeezed his hand and shot him a quick, grateful look. She knew he was trying to distract her by using the term Fritz for the Germans. Now, he frowned, which way is the school? Rachel pointed across the dark garden. I think it's over there. Okay, we'll run on 3, Matt said. You count. Rachel nodded as Matt gripped her hand. 1, 2, 3. They raced from the park onto the street. As they ran toward the west, the glow of the fire got farther away. The sound of explosions sounded fainter too, along with the shouting and sirens. Matt exhaled in relief. Finally, they were getting away from the target area. But what about Chief? What about his parents? Were they still in the cathedral? If he knew them, they'd be on the streets looking for him and Rachel. A car rolled through an intersection ahead of them as more ATS women searched for the wounded. 2 fire trucks with hooded lights sped along Castle Street behind them. I bet they're from other towns, Matt told Rachel, coming to help fight the fires. Rachel tugged on her braid. I'm a little twisted around, she said. A little what? Twisted around. I forget which way is the school. Oh, he said, you're a little turned around. No, I'm not, she announced with a sudden smile. It's this way. She jogged along the street toward the school and Greyfriars Gardens. Matt liked Greyfriars. He liked wandering along the narrow canal and walking through the paths, and he liked the view of the cathedral spires. Matt peered at the sky above the rooftops, hoping to catch sight of the cathedral now, but he couldn't see any towers or spires through the smoke. He hoped his mom and dad were okay. He hoped that Chief had found his way back to them. He must have. He was a smart dog. Why, he was Eric's dog, and then a wave of grief washed over him, just as suddenly as a wave of bombers. Matt didn't want to think about Eric. He lowered his teary eyes, but not before spotting a dark shape swooping over the city. His head sprung upward. Look, there! What? Rachel asked. I don't see. The dark shape swirled and vanished over the rooftops, falling away from the burning streets toward Greyfriars. There was I don't know what it was. It's only a few blocks to the school. I think it was a parachute. You think from one of the English night fighters? Excitement kindled in Matt's heart. After running away from danger all night to save themselves, maybe they could finally run towards something, to help someone else. Maybe that's how Eric had felt about enlisting in the army. I bet, he told Rachel, I bet the pilot must have bailed out. Rachel wrinkled her nose. Like a bale of hay? No. I mean, he must have parachuted out of the plane. He grabbed Rachel's arm. Come on, we've got to find him. We've got to check and see that he's okay. A cloud of smoke wafted down the street. Matt coughed and closed his stinging eyes, but only for a second. Then he started tugging Rachel through the choking smoke, tracking the dark shape toward where it must have fallen just a few blocks away.